I've always been the one who handled our finances, mostly because Mark said it took a weight off his shoulders. So when I first noticed the missing money, I didn't panic, not right away. I told myself it was probably a timing issue, maybe a bill I forgot about, even though deep down I knew I never forgot anything. Still, I tried to play it cool when I asked him about the withdrawals. He barely looked up from his phone when he said he was paying our medical insurance, as if that explained everything. And somehow, the way he said I shouldn't stress over small things made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. Again. But the conversation didn't settle me. It gnawed at me, like a quiet itch I couldn't scratch. Every time I opened the banking app, the numbers felt wrong, tilted, like a picture frame knocked sideways. I tried to brush it off, focusing instead on the rhythmic hum of the dishwasher, the faint smell of coffee still lingering in the kitchen, the everyday things that usually grounded me. But none of it worked. I kept replaying the look on his face, too casual, too practiced, and my stomach kept twisting. Something was off. My body knew it before my mind was willing to admit it. A few days later, I called HR at his company, telling myself it was just to be safe. The woman on the phone was cheerful, oblivious to the storm forming inside me, and she told me our medical insurance had always been fully covered by the company. Always. Nothing had changed. The words hit me like cold water down my spine. I hung up the phone slowly, listening to the dial tone stretch into the air like an accusation. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough for me to feel the shift. A quiet, rising dread that whispered, "He's lying. And this lie is only the beginning." After that call, I couldn't unhear her voice in my head, bright and certain, telling me everything Mark said was a lie. It played on loop while I folded laundry, while I made dinner, even while I tried to sleep. I felt like I was walking around with a glass heart. One wrong move, and it would shatter. Every little detail in the house suddenly felt suspicious. The drawer he kept locked for personal documents, the late nights he claimed were mandatory. Even the way he kissed my cheek felt rehearsed, like he was reading lines from a script he didn't believe in anymore. I tried talking to myself, reasoning it away, telling myself that marriages go through weird phases. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe I was overanalyzing things, the way he always implied I did. But then I'd feel that heavy weight settling on my chest, the one that told me I wasn't imagining anything. I'd been here before, years ago, when my father used to hide financial problems from my mother until everything exploded. I remembered the silence in the house back then, the tension so thick I could taste it. I promised myself I'd never live like that. Yet here I was, feeling history brushing too close to my skin. One night, after Mark went to bed, I sat at the dining table with my laptop glowing in the dark like it was daring me to do something. My hands shook as I logged into our account again, this time writing down every withdrawal, dates, amounts, locations. I could hear Mark snoring faintly down the hall, completely unbothered, while my own breath came shallow and uneven. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I knew this wasn't about health insurance. And as I stared at those numbers lining up in front of me, a cold certainty settled into my bones. Whatever he was hiding, it wasn't small, and it wasn't going away on its own. I kept digging, night after night, slipping out of bed after Mark fell asleep. The house felt different during those hours, quieter, heavier, like it knew I was peeling back layers I was never meant to see. The glow of the screen painted my face in pale light as I compared old statements with new ones, tracing patterns with trembling fingers. I wasn't just looking at numbers anymore. I was looking at lies. And with each new discrepancy I found, something inside me tightened, like a thread pulling tauter and tauter, ready to snap. Sometimes I'd pause, staring out the window into the dark backyard, letting the cold air through the cracked pane hit my face. It grounded me, reminded me I wasn't crazy, no matter how many times he'd implied I was overthinking again. I replayed little moments, him guarding his phone, him dismissing my questions, him telling me I should trust him more. Each memory felt different now, reframed by the growing suspicion gnawing at me like a slow, deliberate burn. It was terrifying to realize how easily someone you love can shape your reality. By the end of the week, I had a notebook full of dates and amounts circled in red ink. I didn't have answers yet, but I had direction, and I wasn't going to stop. I remember closing the notebook, feeling my pulse thudding in my fingertips, and whispering to myself that I deserved the truth, even if it hurt. Especially if it hurt. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment everything in my life began shifting, piece by piece, toward something I never imagined. And deep down, I felt the faintest spark of resolve, a warning of what was coming next. The following days blurred into a strange routine. I'd go through my normal life on autopilot, smiling at neighbors, packing Mark's lunch, answering emails at work. And then, as soon as the sun went down, I'd become someone else entirely. Someone sharper, someone who wasn't afraid to see the truth, even if it gutted her. One night, after cross-checking yet another withdrawal, I noticed the same name appearing beside several transfers, Ana Ribeiro. It sat there on the screen like a stain that wouldn't wash out. At first, my mind scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe she was a physical therapist, a dental hygienist, some random contractor Mark forgot to mention. But as I stared at the name, something cold crawled up the back of my neck. It wasn't just the regularity of the payments, it was the amounts. They were too specific, too consistent, too much like support. I felt my stomach twist so tightly I had to grip the edge of the table just to stay steady. The kitchen around me felt suddenly unfamiliar, the hum of the refrigerator too loud, the overhead light too bright, the air too thin. I typed her name into social media with hands that barely felt attached to my body. When her profile popped up, the first thing I saw was a toddler, maybe 4 years old, laughing in a backyard kiddie pool. My breath hitched. There, in his smile, was Mark. The same dimple, the same eyes that crinkled in the exact same way. For a moment, everything inside me went silent. It was like time thinned, stretched, and then dropped me into a reality I didn't recognize. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overthinking. I was staring at the face of my husband's secret. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that little boy's face, feeling my heartbeat echo in my ears. It wasn't just shock. It was something deeper, heavier, like grief curling itself around my ribs. My hands were cold, but my face burned hot, and for a moment I thought I might actually be sick. I kept blinking, hoping the resemblance would disappear, that maybe I was just tired, maybe the dimple wasn't really the same. But every time I looked back, the truth stared right at me, innocent and undeniable. Pictures kept loading as I scrolled. Birthdays, park outings, little moments that should have been private, but also moments that looked painfully intimate. Moments Mark should have shared with me, but he had shared them with someone else's child, and with someone else. I felt something inside me fissure, a quiet tear that released years of doubt I didn't even know I was carrying. Scenes from my marriage began replaying in jagged flashes, the nights he came home late, the shirts smelling faintly of unfamiliar perfume, the times he brushed off my questions with that condescending smile that made me feel crazy. Suddenly, all those moments reshaped themselves into a pattern I wished desperately I didn't recognize. This wasn't new. This wasn't recent. This betrayal had a timeline, 4 years long, documented in tiny moments he never meant for me to see. I closed my laptop gently, as if slamming it shut would make the truth louder, and in the dim silence of our dining room, I whispered, "How long have you been lying to me?" My own voice sounded foreign, hollow. I didn't know it then, but I was grieving the version of my life I thought I had. That night, I couldn't bring myself to crawl into bed beside him. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him sleep, peacefully, obliviously, and felt a chill wash over me. How could he look so relaxed while living a double life? How could he breathe so easily while my lungs felt like they were folding in on themselves? I ended up sleeping on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of fabric softener, trying to hold myself together while my world quietly cracked. In the early morning before he woke, I opened my laptop again. I needed more than guesses and screenshots. I needed certainty. I went through months of statements, mapping each transfer, aligning them with the child's birth year. Every line confirmed what my heart already understood. He had been paying support since the boy was born. 4 years of lies, 4 years of secret payments, 4 years of looking me in the eyes while hiding a whole other life. My fingers trembled as I wrote down the dates in my notebook, circling them like wounds I needed to trace over and over. By the time the sun started to rise, painting the kitchen in a soft orange glow, something inside me shifted. The despair was still there, raw, aching, but it was no longer alone, Right beneath it, quiet but fierce, a new feeling was forming. Resolve, determination, a kind of emotional sobriety that stripped away every excuse I had made for him. I wasn't done digging. I wasn't even close. If he thought I was the kind of woman who would let this pass, he didn't know me at all. And as awful as this revelation was, I could feel something awakening in me, something that would shape everything that came next. I woke up the next morning feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out the person I used to be and left just the shell. Still, I moved through the house as if nothing had changed, making coffee, opening curtains, pretending to breathe normally. When Mark finally wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and complaining about his rough night, I felt a wave of nausea rise in me. Rough night. He had no idea. He kissed my cheek like he always did, a gesture that once made me feel loved but now made my skin crawl. I watched him pour cereal into a bowl, the clinking sound suddenly grating. That was when I decided I couldn't keep pretending. Not completely. I had to confront him, but not with the explosive fury he probably expected. No, I needed him off balance. I needed him to reveal the kind of man he really was when cornered. So I asked, lightly at first, why he kept withdrawing money for the medical insurance. I watched the muscles in his jaw tighten just slightly before he repeated the lie, word for word, as if he had rehearsed it. He even sighed dramatically, saying I shouldn't turn this into something it isn't. The audacity of it almost stole my breath. I could feel my hands shaking under the table, but my voice stayed steady, unnervingly so. I told him I'd called his company. I told him HR said the insurance had always been covered. For a split second, panic flashed across his face before he tried to bury it beneath annoyance. He said I shouldn't invadir a privacidade dele, that I was being too controlling, that I needed to trust my husband. The irony burned like acid. In that moment, watching him twist the truth so easily, I realized I wasn't speaking to the man I married. I was speaking to the man he'd been hiding all along. I let him ramble, watching him scramble for footing, desperate to turn the blame back onto me. He kept saying things like he didn't deserve this interrogation and that I was making drama out of thin air. It was almost surreal, hearing him perform the same lines he'd used for years. Lines that once made me doubt myself, question my memory, silence my instincts. But now, armed with the truth, his words sounded cheap, transparent, like a magician repeating a trick after the audience already learned where the cards were hidden. So I gently said Anna's name. His entire body froze. It was subtle, a tiny flicker at first, like a candle in the wind. But I saw it. The color drained slightly from his face, and he tried to swallow before he spoke, but his voice cracked on the first word. He asked who Anna was, pretending confusion so poorly it would have been almost laughable if it didn't hurt so much. Then came the anger, sharp and immediate. He said I had crossed a line, that I shouldn't invade asuntos que no me pertenciam, and that he wouldn't explain himself while I was in this hysterical state. Hysterical. I was the calmest I'd ever been. I leaned back in my chair, letting him flail. I didn't mention the child. I didn't tell him about the bank statements or the screenshots or the 4 years of proof I had gathered. I wanted to see what story he'd choose, and he did exactly what I expected. He lied again. He said Anna was just someone who needed financial help, someone he'd been compassionately supporting. He tried to paint himself as benevolent, almost saint-like. I nodded slowly, pretending to absorb it, even offering a soft, I see. I watched relief wash over his face as he thought I believed him. He had no idea how deep into his own trap he'd just walked. He kept talking, digging himself in deeper with every sentence. He said he only kept it from me because he didn't want me to get the wrong idea, as if the only problem here was my tendency to misunderstand him. I watched him pace around the kitchen, running a hand through his hair in that dramatic way he always used when he wanted sympathy. He even said he was hurt that I didn't trust him, that my suspicions were destroying the foundation of our marriage. Hearing those words, from him, almost made me laugh. Almost. Inside, though, something colder was forming. I could feel it spreading through me like frost, numbing the grief just enough so I could think clearly. I kept my face soft, my questions gentle, my tone small enough to make him believe he still had control over the narrative. But my thoughts were razor sharp. Every excuse he gave, every lie he layered on top of another, every attempt to guilt trip me, I absorbed it like evidence. Proof of exactly who he was when he thought I knew nothing. When he finally stopped talking, I nodded slowly and told him I needed time to process. His shoulders dropped the moment I said it. Relief washed over him so quickly, so visibly, it almost made my skin crawl. He kissed the top of my head, called me sweetheart, and said he was glad we had cleared things up. Cleared up. As soon as he left the room, the mask fell from my face. My hands clenched into fists, my jaw tightened, and I felt a steady, powerful certainty settle inside me. He thought he'd convinced me. He thought the storm was over. But he had no idea that, in that exact moment, I quietly decided I was done being the woman he lied to. I was becoming the woman who would end this on my terms. After that conversation, something inside me shifted permanently. I stopped looking for comfort in his words and started looking for clarity in his actions. Every night, once he fell asleep, I went back to my investigation. Not frantically, not emotionally, but with a calm, focused precision I didn't even know I had. I revisited statements, cross-checked dates, and gathered screenshots as if preparing for a trial. In a way, I was. The dining table slowly turned into a battlefield. Notebooks, highlighters, folders lined with truth he never meant for me to find. I knew I needed proper guidance, so I reached out to an attorney friend. Not directly, of course. I framed it as a hypothetical situation about someone I knew. She didn't question it. She just explained, in clear, clinical terms, how hidden dependence could affect taxes, marital assets, and legal responsibility. Her voice was calm, practical, almost soothing, but every word felt like a dagger carving deeper into the reality I was uncovering. By the time I hung up, I understood exactly how serious Mark's secret really was. This wasn't just infidelity. This was fraud. Deception woven into every corner of our marriage. With each piece of information I collected, I felt myself growing steadier, stronger. It was strange. The betrayal hurt, yes, deeply, but the truth also straightened my spine in ways his love never had. I realized I wasn't gathering evidence to confront him anymore. I was gathering evidence to free myself. And somewhere between the highlighted bank statements and the legal notes scribbled in the margins, I recognized a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. A woman who could think clearly, stand firmly, and fight quietly. A woman who was no longer afraid of the truth. Eventually, the investigation led me somewhere I hadn't expected, directly to Anna. For days I debated whether I should reach out. Part of me wanted to stay away, to avoid seeing the face of the woman who'd participated in dismantling my marriage. But another part, the part that needed answers, real answers, knew I couldn't move forward without hearing her side. So I messaged her, simply asking if we could talk. No threats, no accusations, just a request. She responded within minutes, agreeing to meet at a small cafe across town. Walking into that cafe felt like walking into another life. The air was thick with the smell of strong espresso, and the soft clinking of cups filled the otherwise quiet space. Anna sat in the corner, her posture tense, her eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. When she realized it was me, she straightened as if bracing for impact. I surprised her by sitting calmly, folding my hands on the table and speaking gently. I told her I knew about the money. I told her I knew about the child. I didn't mention anger, only truth. She hesitated at first, but then something in her expression softened, like she'd been carrying her own burden and finally had a chance to set it down. She admitted in a low, almost shaky voice that she did know Mark was married. From the beginning. She said he told her he was emotionally trapped, that I was cold, that I didn't care about him anymore, that he was planning to leave me as soon as the time was right. The words sliced through me, each one a fresh wound layered on top of the others. But what struck me most wasn't what she said, it was how exhausted she looked saying it. I realized then that we were both victims of the same man, just in different ways. She had been fed a fantasy. I had been fed a lie, and somewhere between those two worlds, he had built a life that belonged to neither of us. When our conversation ended, I walked out into the cool air feeling hollow but strangely clear-headed. Anna didn't give me closure. She gave me confirmation. And now that I knew the whole truth, I finally knew exactly what I needed to do next. Leaving the cafe, I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that follows a storm you survived without realizing how strong you were. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain on pavement, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could inhale fully. I walked slowly to my car, letting everything Anna said echo through me, not to torture myself, but to understand the entire picture. Mark hadn't just deceived me. He had crafted two narratives, two identities, two versions of himself, depending on who was listening. And now that I had both sides, his lies had nowhere left to hide. That night, I spread all my evidence across the dining table again. The bank statements, the screenshots, the timeline of payments, even the notes from my attorney friend. But this time, I wasn't anxious or shaky. I was steady, methodical. I arranged every piece in order, like assembling the final fragments of a puzzle I was now ready to finish. The overhead light buzzed softly, illuminating the papers with a sterile glow, and I realized how symbolic the scene felt. My truth laid out plainly, no longer tangled in excuses or hope. I knew the next step wasn't just confrontation. That had already happened, and he'd chosen lies over honesty even when cornered. No, the next step was accountability. Real, legal, unavoidable accountability. I pulled out a fresh folder and began assembling everything I'd take to the lawyer. Dates, amounts, discrepancies, proof of deception during the marriage. Every paper I slid into that folder felt like reclaiming a piece of myself he'd chipped away over the years. And by the time I closed it, pressing the cover flat with both hands, I understood something with absolute clarity. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for my freedom. And he wasn't going to see it coming. The morning I set everything in motion felt eerily ordinary. I brewed coffee, fed the cat, opened the blinds, all the tiny rituals that once made our home feel warm. But now I moved through them with a quiet purpose, like someone performing the last steps of a ceremony. Mark sat at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone, completely unaware that the life he'd built on lies was about to collapse. When he looked up and smiled at me, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just a profound sense of detachment, as if I were observing a stranger rehearsing a role he no longer deserved to play. I spent the morning pretending everything was normal, even agreeing when he suggested we could have a date night soon to reconnect. Reconnect. I almost choked on my own breath, but I nodded sweetly, letting him believe I was still the soft, forgiving woman he thought he could manipulate indefinitely. Meanwhile, the folder with all the evidence sat neatly inside my tote bag, resting against my hip like a quiet promise. In just a few hours, I would walk into my lawyer's office and start dismantling the version of our life he insisted was real. As afternoon approached, I told him I had errands to run. He barely looked up, mumbling something about needing to work late. That was his final lie to me. Casual, effortless, spoken without hesitation. I watched him adjust his tie in the hallway mirror, the same mirror where I once stood beside him believing we were building a future together. Now, all I could see was the reflection of a man who mistook my silence for weakness. When he finally walked out the door, I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. It was time. The law office felt colder than I expected. Not unwelcoming, just stark, the kind of place where truth is stripped down to facts and paperwork. The receptionist offered me water, but my hands were too tight around the folder to accept it. When my attorney, Marcia, greeted me, her voice was steady and grounding, like an anchor in a storm I'd been weathering alone for far too long. We sat in her office, the blinds half closed, sunlight filtered into long pale stripes across her desk. I laid everything out in front of her, the transfers, the timeline, the screenshots, the notes. Watching her eyebrows slowly rise as she scanned the documents made everything feel painfully real. Marcia didn't sugarcoat anything. She told me directly that Mark's deception could carry serious legal consequences, especially regarding marital assets and undeclared dependents. Hearing those words was strangely empowering. It wasn't vengeance I felt, but validation. I hadn't imagined the betrayal. I hadn't exaggerated the lies. They were right there in black and white, and now someone else could see them too. Marcia began outlining the next steps: filing for divorce, documenting financial misconduct, securing my share of assets before he could try to move anything. Her professionalism gave me clarity, a kind of emotional oxygen I hadn't realized I was starving for. By the time she drafted the initial documents, my pulse had steadied. She slid them across the table toward me, crisp pages that signified the official beginning of the end. My signature looked strangely confident, almost elegant, like a declaration rather than a plea. When we finished, Marcia asked if I wanted her present when I confronted Mark with the papers. I shook my head. This part, I needed to do alone. Walking out of her office, I felt lighter. Not happy, not victorious, but undeniably lighter. The kind of lightness that comes when you finally stop carrying a burden that was never yours to hold in the first place. I got home before Mark, which gave me time to prepare the space. Not dramatically, not vengefully, just intentionally. I placed the signed divorce papers on the dining table, neatly stacked beside the folder of evidence. The same table where I'd eaten meals with him, laughed with him, listened to his stories, and quietly uncovered the truth he thought I'd never find. The house was still, almost holding its breath with me. Even the ticking clock on the wall sounded louder, each second pulling me closer to the moment everything would finally unfold. When Mark walked through the door, his smile was automatic, careless, the smile of a man who believes his world is intact. But it faltered the moment he saw the papers. His expression shifted quickly. Confusion, then worry, then a defensive anger he didn't even try to hide. He asked what this nonsense was, saying I was blowing things out of proportion. But when he reached for the folder and saw the first page, a bank statement with repeated payments to Anna, the color drained from his face. He stuttered something about explanations, about misunderstandings, about me ruining everything for no reason. His voice cracked on that last line. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply told him the truth, that I knew about the child, that I knew how long he'd been lying, and that I knew the medical insurance excuse was nothing but a flimsy attempt to cover the withdrawals. He begged, not for forgiveness, not really, but for secrecy. He said I didn't have to destroy his life, as if mine hadn't already been gutted by his choices. I watched him unravel, watched the weight of his lies collapse onto him all at once. And in that moment, standing there in the home we once shared, I felt something quiet and powerful rise in me. Not triumph, not revenge, just freedom. The kind that comes when the truth finally stops hiding. It's strange how silence feels different when it finally belongs to you. The house is quiet now, not with tension, not with avoidance, but with peace. Real peace. I wake up without bracing myself for the next lie, the next excuse, the next moment of feeling crazy for noticing what was right in front of me. These days, my mornings are slow. I brew coffee the way I like it, not the way Mark preferred. I sit by the window and let the sunlight warm my legs while I breathe in the quiet, letting it settle into the spaces he once filled with doubt. The divorce moved quickly, faster than I expected. Marcia handled everything with precision, and the evidence spoke louder than either of us needed to. Mark tried to fight it at first, tried to paint himself as the victim, but the paper trail was too thick, too damning. Eventually, he stopped resisting and shifted into damage control, scrambling to hold together the life he built on lies. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he's struggling. With money, with custody issues, with reputation. I thought knowing that would give me satisfaction, but instead it just feels distant, like watching a storm pass somewhere far away. What surprises me most is how whole I feel now. Not instantly, healing never works that way, but gradually, like pieces of myself returning one by one. I find joy in small things. Folding warm laundry, watering my plants, listening to the soft hum of the dishwasher at night. I didn't realize how much noise his lies added to my life until they were gone. And now, every quiet moment feels like a gift I finally allowed myself to open. Sometimes I think back to the moment I discovered the truth, that single photo of a laughing little boy with Mark's smile, and I wonder how I didn't fall apart completely. But maybe that was the turning point I needed, the fracture that let the light in. I've stopped blaming myself for not seeing it sooner. When you love someone, you give them the benefit of the doubt, you trust their words, you assume loyalty where you've given it freely. That isn't foolishness, that's honesty. And if anything, it's his shame, not mine, that he mistook my honesty for ignorance. Every now and then, Anna sends a brief update. Not because we're friends, but because we share a strange, unwanted connection. Her messages are short, practical, and surprisingly respectful. She tells me the boy is doing well, that she's managing on her own now, that she's grateful he has stability despite Mark's chaos. I never ask for details, but I also never ignore her messages. We were both trapped in different versions of his deception, and acknowledging that truth feels like the final thread tying me to the past, thin, fragile, and almost ready to release. What I don't do is look Mark up. I don't check his accounts, don't ask anyone how he's doing, don't linger on old memories hoping they'll hurt less with time. I've learned that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about choosing where to place your attention, and I choose now, my present, my peace, my quiet, steady future. I'm no longer the woman who tiptoed around someone else's secrets. I'm the woman who walked out of the shadows he cast and rebuilt her own life in the light. These days, I catch myself smiling at nothing, at the way the light hits the living room wall, at the smell of fresh sheets, at the sound of my own footsteps in a house that finally feels like mine. There's a freedom in living without lies, a softness in waking up without bracing for disappointment. I never realized how much of myself I'd handed over to Mark's version of reality until I started reclaiming those pieces one quiet morning at a time. And now, standing firmly in the life I rebuilt, I feel something I hadn't felt in years: certainty. There are moments when people ask if I regret not working things out, if I ever miss the life I had. I usually just smile politely, because they have no idea how heavy that life was, how much pretending it required, how much silence it demanded. I don't regret leaving. I regret staying as long as I did. But even that regret has softened into something else: understanding. I stayed because I believed in us. I left because I finally believed in myself. And that's the real ending of this story. Not the divorce, not the confrontation, not the revenge he never saw coming. The real ending is me, sitting here with a heart that's no longer breaking, a mind that's no longer doubting, and a life that's finally aligned with the woman I always was beneath the hurt. He didn't destroy me. He revealed me. And I'm done carrying his secrets. I'm done living in his shadow. This time I get to walk forward on my own terms, and the path ahead has never looked clearer.